Hey everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Teri Hunter. I'm an intuitive astrologer. And if you were born with Pluto in Leo, Uranus in Leo, and Jupiter in Leo in your natal chart, you're a boomer or you're a Gen Xer. But this video is for you because this Jupiter transit that's going to start on June 30th and last until June 2027 is going to be very powerful, not just for you as individuals, but for the collective, the generations, specifically boomers and Gen Xers. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to talk about what this is going to mean for Jupiter to move into Leo, because it is going to move in making an opposition to Pluto and a square to Chiron. We're going to see over the next 3 months, I'm focusing this video pretty much on June through September, because Jupiter will plow through the first 19 degrees of Leo, making aspects to Neptune, aspects to Saturn, and Uranus. And this whole transit starts with a sextile from Jupiter to Uranus conjunct Mars. This is a huge transit for a generation, for a redefining of the self, the creative self. We're going to see that there will be themes that involve our personal authority and our creativity and our leadership. And very much, do we still feel of value? So I'm going to jump right in and start to talk about what it means for Jupiter to move into Leo. Normally, this is just the expansion of fun, creativity, willing to take a risk on yourself, willing to stand in the spotlight and to say, I am valuable. But in this particular transit, we're seeing the outer planets in positions they have not been in generations. The Leo energy has not experienced an opposition from Pluto in 248 years. It has not experienced a trine to Neptune in 144 years, give or take. So this is really going to bring out a lot. Specifically, the generation that was, the years that Pluto was in Leo was 1939 to 1957. Uranus was in Leo from 1955 through 1962. And from late August 1955 through, I believe, late August 1956, Jupiter was in Leo. So if you're born between 1956 or 1955 and 1956, this is going to be a wild year for you. That's all I got to say. Let's talk a little bit about what the themes are when you're born with Pluto in Leo. It is about personal authority. It is about standing up for leadership, having the courage and the heart to stand for what is authentic to you. It is very much about leaving a legacy behind. You know, we think about actors, even think about Elvis Presley. He's a perfect example. I don't know what his chart is like, but he's a performer who, years after his death in 1977, is still revered and still, you know, his songs are still being sung all over the world in competitions on radio, etc. So it's really about leaving a legacy and feeling like a star. When we look at Uranus in Leo, we are looking at Uranus in detriment. It is in the furthest place away from its home, and Uranus already feels a little bit outside because Uranus is the point that looks to the future. It's the planet that represents what can be through innovation and through our own personal genius. Now it's here in Leo, having to stand out in its individuality and having to be different and yet own it and stand in its nonconformity and in its shockingness, you know, it would shock the tradition. So this is really a generation of people who broke the mold. And now with this planetary activity lighting up this part of your chart, because depending upon what house Leo is for you, will give you another indication of what the environment is where this will take place. But essentially, what this is, it's about standing in your total authenticity, in your willingness to I want to offer it this way because it's not about being selfish in the sense of Leo is very individualistic and Aquarius is very much about the mass consciousness. But in some respects, there have been a sense of personal authority for our lives, but maybe not a personal authority for how we are showing up as a collective. And I think that's part of what's going to come back around. Also, Leo rules youth, it rules the child. So many people are experiencing this chapter in their lives where their youth is gone and they're redefining, am I still valuable? Do I still matter? Do I still have a voice? So these kind of things are going to happen and come up for you. And I want to offer this too, because I want to emphasize that you've had Jupiter returns or Jupiter hitting your natal chart every 12 years since you were born. But you didn't have it where there were oppositions to Pluto. There's a sextile to Uranus. There is a trine to Neptune. And in a few months, there'll be a trine to Saturn, which is very fortuitous. And at the same time, while this isn't a focus because it's not coming into play just yet, the South Node is entering Leo in July. And it comes from the backside. So it enters at 29 degrees. And eventually, Jupiter and the South Node are going to convene. And they're going to hit all these points within your Leo energy. And I'm talking to the generation that's born between 1939 and 1962. Those born with Pluto and Leo will not all have Uranus in Leo, just those from 1955 to 1962. And 1955 to 1956 are the ones who are going to have potentially Jupiter in Leo. If not, you have Jupiter in Cancer, and that's very fortuitous. You've been experiencing your Cancer return. So when we talk about Jupiter in general in Leo, it brings up passion and excitement and creativity and confidence and a desire for romance and fun and willing to take a risk. It's very entrepreneurial. And so it really wants to exercise its talents and then create wealth with that. The potential to feel more energized and more excited initially is there, but I think that is slightly dampened because as Jupiter enters Leo, it forms a square to Chiron, and Chiron is just entering Taurus. Over the next 3 months, it will be 0 degrees of Taurus, and then it will retrograde back into Aries until April 2027. So I think that this very much affects this initial 3 months of Jupiter's transit. While Jupiter obviously is moving much faster than Chiron, well, it's sort of like for someone to hit this point, this point, this point, and this point. So it sort of feels like maybe a domino effect. When we're looking at this square with Chiron, we're looking about really, have I utilized my gifts? Do I feel that my beliefs and my values are still relevant to who and what I've evolved into and what my heart wants? The Taurus energy is very much about personal values, about beliefs, about self-confidence, about your voice as an opinion, not just an apparatus, although it rules the voice and the neck and, or I should say the throat and the neck and the shoulders. It's also the Taurus energy is one that likes to build, likes to grow things. So there could be conflict of whether or not you're still able to expand and grow in the ways you want to. Again, this is the first generation. The boomers were the first generation to really embrace perpetual youth in some respects, not wanting to cash it in and grow old. So coming to a certain age, whether you're coming into 60, 70, or even potentially 80, these questions can keep bouncing around in your head. Much of the generation that is experiencing this square to Chiron, because Chiron is it's hovering through the first degree, the very raw energy of Taurus. And Taurus can feel very insecure, wanting to have plenty of resources and know that there's things that are, stockpiled in some respects, that their comfort, their food, the house, the roof over their head is secure. And when you're looking at the Leo energy of stepping out and following your heart, this can be contrary. And at the same time that this is happening, Pluto, in opposition to Jupiter in Aquarius, is making a square to Chiron. It's a loose square right now because as I record this, Pluto is retrograded about 4 or 5 degrees of Aquarius. It will go back to 3 degrees and then move forward again. So Pluto's really unearthing and really intentional about removing whatever ego systems are not in balance. They're either not a strong enough ego or there is too inflated of an ego. And how are we directing our authority, our leadership, our authenticity into the collective? And how are we contributing to the collective? How are we contributing to a not a collective, a vision of the future for the collective? Chiron sits in the middle of the orbit between Uranus and Saturn. Uranus rules Aquarius, as does Saturn. Saturn is the ancient ruler, but this is the future versus the past. So the wounds of the past can very much be the manure that makes the future more fruitful, but it's going to take our intention and our consciousness in order to implement that and be aware of it without judgment. The thing about Pluto, I personally, as an astrologer, I believe Pluto understands the deep psychological nature that grips us and makes us feel small because we are not powerful enough, we don't have enough money. I don't think, though, that Pluto is actually emotional. I think Pluto uses that information almost like a war leader, moving and manipulating the pieces around. So when you understand that energy, then you are the peaceful warrior versus the more aggressive warrior. So I think this is an important dynamic because recognizing that there's the potential of you feeling, how worthy am I? How valuable am I if I'm not in the prime of my life, if I don't have this amount of money, if I'm not having this amount of influence, is it worth it? And I think it is worth it because we see the trine to Neptune. So let me get there. My little notes here. In the trine to Neptune, Neptune is in Aries for the first time since the late 1800s, around 1865, 1861, somewhere around there. I didn't write the dates down. This is a redefinition of the self from a creative space, from a spiritual space, understanding the soul is inhabiting a physical experience, and also from a place of imagination, of dreams. And initially, Neptune in the house of self will feel erosive. It was very challenging when it was in conjunction with Saturn. Saturn is still in Aries. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So this trine that Jupiter is making as its first few, degrees of its transit into Leo is accentuating the opportunity to be brave and exploring new dynamics for yourself, new dynamics of your creativity, being willing to risk on the fact that you are an evolved being and that each chapter of life offers its own peaks and valleys. And many of us at this age are experiencing our wisdom, the opportunity to be the sage in our lives and for those around us, not because we preach to them, Jupiter, but because we demonstrate to them the Leo energy. So I think this is important. I think it'll bring an opportunity to feel compassion, not only for others, but for ourselves as we continue to become more aware of these spots that have held us back up until now. That's Pluto. Pluto's not going to stop influencing this energy for quite some time. Pluto's a 20-year transit in opposition to Leo. So wherever the house is, whatever your rising sign is, will indicate where Aquarius is, and then the opposite sign being Leo will then show you where the most of this transformation will take place for you. You also may discover during this Neptune transit that you have a whole new calling in life, that you feel actually more inspired through inaction, understanding the value of connecting with nature or connecting with spirit or being connected to your emotional body. The water, Neptune rules the water, and the water, I'm always inspired when I'm in the shower or whenever I don't have a pen and I'm in water. So you may find that as you walk through some of the more challenging dynamics of these transits and they trigger your natal chart, and whatever aspects your natal chart is making will give you other evidence. For instance, if your Pluto is in a favorable aspect to some other planets, then this transit will accentuate that. If you have a square potentially or another opposition, it will accentuate that. So I think that this is really an opportunity to look at your natal chart and get some clues as to how you're going to feel over this next year and how it's going to affect the generation and how we move forward, because we also have this huge technology boost showing up. We also see Jupiter making a sextile to Uranus. And in the very beginning of this transit, Mars is conjunct Uranus. I think this is pretty wild because in the United States chart, it's a little sketchy, meaning it's a little, I think, volatile. But on a personal level, I think this is very awakening, enlightening. It's an opportunity to be brave in our thoughts, in our speech, in how we rewrite our everyday lives, what we prioritize and what we don't prioritize. I think you're gonna find that. And that's another beautiful thing about age. And those of you that are what I would consider the younger, the Gen Xers, since I'm actually a Jones generation because I'm late boomer, but the Gen Xers are also experiencing a Chiron return coming up. And so those of you that have Chiron in Taurus will have that. And that happens when you're around 49, 50, 52, depending upon your chart. So good times, good times. All right. So the sextile to Uranus, I want to just kind of open this up a little bit because what we may see here as well, because Gemini rules the people, okay? And Leo rules individuality. So as Jupiter is going through this and making this sextile, which is favorable, but requires an activation, an awareness, a willingness to co-create with it. I think this could be very powerful because we could see many of you starting new technologies, using new technologies to express yourself, podcasts, and going from almost going from a storyteller to a sage, applying what you know. And I don't mean this like as a preacher way. I almost mean it sort of like it's an inadvertent storyteller, where the stories that you tell about what you've walked through and how you rose above it become the evidence of your wisdom and walking into that sage chapter of life, where the things that have been hard are now some of them are beneficial, meaning they brought benefit into your life. I know it's hard to find it, but it's there. Okay. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say about the Uranus dynamic is there will be a yearn for freedom, freedom from restriction of your own thoughts, your speech, how you want to educate yourself or those around you, or how, there is a feeling of rebellion against oppression, against sheep kind of mentality or herd mentality, without discernment. And that's another thing that Pluto will actually favor. Pluto is making a trine to Uranus during this dynamic or this period of time. And this dynamic, it brings an awakening of how we are subtly controlled through the media, through our minds, through journalism, through how things are depicted versus how they may be in reality. Okay, go on to my next point. Look at my little notes here. Okay, now this becomes favorable. Right now, Saturn is, I think, about 14 degrees of, as I record this, might be 12 degrees of Aries. When Jupiter moves into Leo, it's going to trine Neptune, and then it's going to start to trine Saturn. And all the awarenesses, all the spiritual integration, all the dreaminess, all the imagination, all the willingness to allow that which has been toxic to be eroded, to be not released, but to be integrated in some way as an intuitive awareness, almost like the dark spots become your intuitive guide of when you feel that again, you get this little zzz, and then you know to be on alert, to pay attention so you don't fall prey to something you've done before. I think all of this is really important because when Jupiter trines Saturn, this is when we start to build it in the real world. When we start to see them actually, Jupiter and Saturn in trine are very favorable because we see this great expansion of Jupiter, the potential wealth of Jupiter, the new ideologies and philosophies and ways of thinking, and maybe even where you've been educated through experience and through, what you've walked through as a generation who has the planet of liberation and the planet of power and control in the sign of self and the sign of co-creation, Leo. I think this is going to be a time with your awareness that could be a harnessing of energy, a harnessing of building things. Saturn wants to reward, but Saturn just doesn't give rewards away freely. That's why it appears restrictive, because we become a society that wants to take a pill and get better. It doesn't want to walk through the pain that actually creates the wisdom, Chiron. So when this trine starts to happen, and those of you I assume that watch this kind of content are looking to integrate that wisdom, and Saturn will reward you with long-term gains. And then your trials and tribulations become the exercises of the hero so that your muscles don't get weak and you don't feel disempowered by this transit, because the idea of this transit of Jupiter triggering Pluto, triggering Uranus in your natal chart is a generational expansion of, how do I want to phrase this? Because Pluto releases toxicity. Pluto wants to get rid of the nonsense that's plugging us up and holding us back. And Jupiter will expand that first, and then Uranus will liberate us. And then if you think about it as well, if with Uranus in Gemini, you're having a Uranus sextile return kind of idea. So you'll have all these points that are like dominoes or like pieces of a puzzle. One fits into another that makes things move. I also want to say that and I think I might have said it at the beginning of this video, but the South Node transit is going to be moving into the Leo Aquarius axis, the South Node, North Node axis. And when it does, it's going to start traversing, from 29 degrees forward, or actually backward into Leo. So this is also going to hit all these points in your chart and hit the squares and the trines. I mean, it's magnificent on some level, because it's as if the stars are aligning in such a way that the demolition can't be stopped. And I mean this in a way so we can rebuild from a much better perspective, because when I almost like hear the construction crew coming and everything's been taped off and all the safety safety guidelines have been put into place. And that is the wisdom of this time in our lives, the chapter that we're in. We're not new on the planet anymore. So the great thing about this whole dynamic with Jupiter and Saturn is that we're going to be building a new sense of self, and we're going to be doubling down on the idea that we are spiritual creatures, very powerful in our co-creation through our thoughts, through our words, through our emotional body. And that to me is really the key that turns the lock here in the Leo energy, that allows me to act with courage and to take a risk on myself, because I'm not really risking anything. My divine wisdom knows that my vibration, my attitude, my belief is taking me into my experiences. They're not happening to me. Jupiter co-rules Pisces. So Jupiter has the ability to traverse realms, to expand on your spiritual nature. And Saturn is offering this trine to build it in the material world, to build it in a way that provides reward that is sustainable over a lifetime, which will then, in many ways, help mitigate the harshness of a Chiron return or a Chiron square to Jupiter or to your other planets. So this is pretty much it for me. I'm kind of, again, focusing in, this conversation is kind of focused in mostly on the first 3 months and Jupiter's beginning entry into the sign. It will move all the way to 19 degrees over half the sign by September. It will continue on, and then it will retrograde, I believe, in November. So this is, yeah, most everybody's going to get hit this year, and it's going to be big because that's what Jupiter likes to do. If you like this video, please share it with your friends, hit the like button, hit the little notification bell. We're going to be talking a lot about how the outer planets are being triggered and how the generation that broke the mold, that brought rock and roll to the floor. That's what happened back in the day when Pluto and Uranus were in Leo. Rock and roll came and it built legends like Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley, like I said earlier. So, not going to be easy for us if we try to do the same old thing. But if we're willing to innovate and renovate and look to the future, it could be a very exciting time. So thank you very much. Again, my name is Teri Hunter. If you'd like to get a reading with me, my information is below. See you soon.